Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I like to take the time right here to first thank my guests for coming because I know they're pairing with a couple of things that I truly, absolutely 100% deem precious, and that is time. I know with time and the lack of time management and understanding the value of time, one can simply waste it. But I want to thank Barbara so much for coming and sharing some of that quality time with us here at Threads of Enlightenment. The other is her journey. The journey is designed to introduce you to you. And you are able to share that with us because it was who you were that made you who you are today. And it houses pain, it houses victory, wisdom, all of these things that are precious. And I want to thank you so much for coming here and sharing that with us here at Threads of Enlightenment. Thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure, and I am really looking forward to talking with you and sharing with your listeners.
Excellent. Barbara, tell them all the things that you have created so far, or you've given birth out of you that were residing there, and you're able to release. Talk to them about it. What is the purpose of it, and so forth. And then we will deconstruct that beautiful story, as I said earlier, and find out how did you get there.
Okay. Well, at this point in my life, I am not a young person. I am retired. I am a parent, a grandparent. I have a 40-year career in education. I worked with children in the general population, and I worked with children that had special needs. So I am certified in both general and special needs education. I am now formally retired from the classroom, but retirement lasted about 2 days for me because I very, very rapidly decided this is not going to be a sit around gardening, looking at the clouds kind of experience for me. So I took my resources and my previous experience and combine them into a few new projects. First, I started writing historical articles for a local news magazine. My background in college, graduate and undergraduate, is history. So I have graduate and undergraduate degrees in history. But I always loved working with people. So when I finished my training, I realized very quickly that I was not going to be one of these historians in the ivory tower, world of academia, just doing research and presenting academic papers. I wanted to teach, but I really felt drawn to younger children. So I started teaching elementary school, and that for a while didn't afford me the opportunity to do as much with the history. So when I finally retired, I wanted to combine those two passions of mine into something that I could work with and use all of the tools that I have developed through the years in order to help both children and adults. So this is what I did. I started out with the historical articles, and then I developed a children's series. I see the need for a much more active approach to learning, not the traditional textbook approach that probably you and I grew up with when we were young and in elementary school. But I wanted to get children excited again about history, because to know history is to understand everything has a history. We are not born into a vacuum. So when we're born into our family, we have our ancestors who came before us. They have already created a historical thread for us. We come into a community that is bound by common threads of culture and customs, traditions. We settle in a community for certain reasons, and we are all part of a larger global existence. And we all interact with and affect each other. So I wanted to bring all of those things together. I wanted to create something that would inspire children, that would at the same time entertain them, would allow them to see themselves as a part of these stories, and then would help to develop critical thinking skills within them so that they could go out and apply the lessons that they learned. My stories began with a suggestion by my husband. My husband is also my illustrator. My books are picture books. They are very highly visual. And my character, Little Miss History, is a cartoon character who is a younger version of myself. So she wears pigtails. She wears huge rose-colored glasses to reflect an optimistic outlook on the world, looking to see things through a positive lens. She wears a kind of hiking travel camper outfit that explores my early sense of always wanted to travel and see the world and learn about different types of people and different types of things, different ways of living. So she wears oversized boots, which reflect a piece of my personal history. That's my father's big feet. And she's just kind of a fun composite. And I want children to see a bit of themselves in her, to feel as if they are going along on the journey. So the books have illustrations of this character narrating, but within the books, I cover all types of historical adventures. Some of them are iconic sites like the Statue of Liberty, Mount Rushmore, Ellis Island. Others are more of a environmental or nature impact, like Sequoia National Park. One of my books, La Brea Tar Pits, goes back into prehistory and brings children to a historical site where archaeologists are actively working today to uncover fossils, and the children are able to see the scientists at work and to visualize a prehistoric garden and walk through it as if they had lived 40,000 years ago. I have a book on the North Pole. Now, that one is one of the few which I have not personally visited, because all of my books also incorporate actual photography from the site. So the North Pole is an exception to that rule. I haven't made it to the North Pole yet. But the books are not just history, but they are all of the different disciplines that are involved in history. So within my books, children learn about science, the North Pole. They learn about the climate. They learn about the seasons. They learn about the animals that live at the North Pole. They learn about the 8 countries that claim territory in the Arctic region. So they're learning history, they're learning geography, they're learning science. And of course, we could not leave out Santa Claus and how the whole story of Santa Claus developed. So my books feature portraits, photography, the character narrating, and interactive questions that I want the children to think about and answer. For instance, in my North Pole book, we talk about all of those different regions, the different cultures, and how stories came together. In Sequoia National Park, we talk about the early explorers, we talk about geology, we talk about the wildlife. In Sequoia National Park, we talk about the pollution. We talk about the fact that it is the most unhealthy national park. Here we are in the beautiful San Joaquin Valley, but they at times have to post signs that it's unhealthy to breathe the air that. I ask children, what do they think about that? What do they think about environment? How could they solve those problems? I talk about people who have been forgotten in history. People like Alonzo Swan, who served on the Intrepid. He was part of an African American unit that helped save the Intrepid from a kamikaze attack. And he was awarded a Bronze Star, but he felt his unit, the few survivors that remained, deserved something more than that. And he fought for 50 years and was finally awarded the Naval Cross. We talk about, again, going back to the North Pole, we talk about Matthew Henson, who worked with Admiral Perry, and he was actually an African American explorer who was pretty much forgotten in history until recently. He planned most of the expeditions that
Oh,
Perry went on. And there were 28 of them, not just that one to the North Pole. So we have cultures, customs, traditions, talking about Native Americans and what happened at Mount Rushmore, how the land was taken from the Native Americans. What did children think about that? Now today they're building their own memorial, Crazy
yeah.
Horse to Crazy
Hmm.
Horse. So we talk about all kinds of little known facts and people, which I think children should know about as well. So that's kind of the journey with my books. And then from there, I kind of expanded outward, and put my teaching hat back on. So
Hmm.
I do teaching lessons for children. I do these little mini lessons called the 2 Minute Teacher. And on my YouTube channel, I have lessons that parents and teachers can use for everything, not just history. So I do lessons on critical thinking, on writing, on science, on math, all kinds of little things that parents and teachers can do to supplement the critical thinking process and help their children to grow even more. I have a blog. I review children's books. I do advice and tips articles for parents and teachers on my blog. And I have all the other social media channels as well, LinkedIn, Twitter. I have a Facebook page and all. So my mission is to give parents and teachers strategies and tools that they can use to help their children become critical thinkers, know and understand their history, participate in their government, and give them the tools to become the leaders of tomorrow.
That is awesome. You have a full gamut, and I appreciate the fact that you're taking the children back into the history and even pulling out some of the unknowns within history, but played a pivotal part within it. So, Barbara, let's here at Threads of Enlightenment, we go back a little. We want to go back into your childhood. I want to know because we want to delve into a little about you and to find out how did you get to where you are today, producing and doing all of these wonderful things to assist parents, teachers, and to lift up the children to a higher level. What was your family like when you were home? How was your upbringing? That type of thing when you were growing up.
Well, I grew up in New York City, in one of the boroughs of New York City. So I was born in Brooklyn.
Which one? Brooklyn?
I was born in Brooklyn, but technically I grew up in Queens. I grew up in the Ridgewood section of Queens, and I was actually 3 houses up from the border. So the
Oh.
street separated Brooklyn and Queens. So I was on the Queens side. So I grew up in Queens, but went to elementary school in Brooklyn and
Hmm.
high school in Brooklyn. So it
Wow.
was very confusing, very funny, because for a long time, the post office did not have a zip code that represented that dividing line. So
Hmm.
my mail actually had a Brooklyn zip code, even though I lived in Queens. So it is a little crazy, but it was a working neighborhood. So I grew up, and my parents were not wealthy. My parents both worked very hard, and they were loving parents who tried to give me everything they could. But we lived with a limited income. So I did not have a car growing up. My parents did try to take me to different places like parks and museums,
Hmm.
but we took the subway. And I didn't have an opportunity as a young child to do much traveling. And from a very young age, I was curious about people who lived in different places and had different experiences from me. So I always had that love of wanting to go out and travel and explore. I think that's why I loved history so much,
Yeah.
because all of these people had such exciting adventures, and they were able, like, go off on a ship and sail across an unknown ocean. And oh, gee, I wanted to do that. So that was part of it. But my parents, again, not having a lot of means, it looked as if college was not going to be in the cards for me. I always loved school. So I loved
Hmm.
to read. I loved school from the get-go. And I did well at school. I always wanted to learn. Every day I wanted to learn something new. But when it came time to high school, I went to a high school that was going to prepare me for a kind of business type career. So, what my parents had in mind was it would be great if I could get the skills at that time, secretarial work was very big. So, I went
Yeah.
to a high school that taught this business program, and I was on my way to doing that. And in high school, I met a teacher in my sophomore year who was a history teacher, taught
Hmm.
world history, and was a dynamo. She was all of 4'11", and she would bounce around the room, and she would make everything come alive.
Wow.
And I just loved her, and I worked very hard in her class. And well, I think I got something like a 97 in the history regions, but I was just immersed in everything she did, and she took a liking to me. And she took me aside and she said, "Oh, well, what are your plans after high school?" And I said, "Well, I'm taking the business track, and I plan to go into that kind of position in the business world." And she said, "No, you have to go to college." And I said, "Well, I really don't have the means to afford college."
Yeah.
But she put me on the right track. So she said, "Well, and at that time this existed, no longer does. There
Hmm.
was in existence in New York City a city university system that
Yep.
was based on merit. So the admission was totally based on grade point average, and different colleges within that system had different criteria. So I put my nose to the grindstone and went even crazier than I was before. And everything was academic with me. And I managed to get myself into my first choice college, which was Hunter College.
Wow.
And I got in, and I worked on Saturdays, worked during my breaks with those secretarial skills, which came in handy because I did well with them. So I was
Yeah.
able to get temporary employment jobs, and
Yeah.
I was able to use that to supplement to buy my books and all the other expenses. What I really wanted to do was go to college away, but of course
Yeah.
that would have been impossible. So there I went, and in college, I applied myself, and I managed to graduate in 3 years.
What did you study? What field of
History.
study did you pick?
My major
History?
was history. Um,
And is it all, Barbara, all because of the influence of that teacher
yes,
that
pretty
pulled you
much. I mean, I
to
wanted to go to college, but
yeah,
it looked as if there wouldn't be a way,
yeah.
and she
And when she
set me
pointed
on
you,
that track.
yeah. I'm
So I
from Queens
graduated
Village, by
high
the
school,
way. I'm
excuse
from
me?
Queens Village. Queens Village,
Yep, the other
Queens.
side of
Yeah, yeah,
Queens.
the other side. I wanted to put that in, but yeah, Hunter's College, I know, and not too far from there. When I got married, I was living not too far from there, so I'm familiar with the landmarks that you're mentioning as you tell your story. And the reason why I stopped you because I wanted to bring it out that it was that teacher. And the reason why I wanted to do that was to make people aware that sometimes there are people that will come into your space that will change the trajectory of your life, whether it's in high school or even as you're an adult. Someone will come, and so in some cases, you have to be aware. I always tell people, be aware of who present, because when some of them can change the direction of your life. So you
Oh,
have to
she
learn.
definitely changed the direction of my life for sure. Yeah.
Well,
And another
see,
teacher did all as well
yeah, go
because
ahead.
I was so into this experience that I continued to take courses during the summer months. So I met other teachers. I met teachers from Queens College as well, where I took
Hmm.
courses. I wanted to develop a whole experience. So I took as much work as I could to supplement history. So I took art, history. I took courses in language that would supplement the history. At the time I was studying a lot of ancient history, so I took Latin during the summer to
Wow.
learn some Latin. And I met another teacher who, unbeknownst to me, put my name in for a graduate assistantship
Mm.
for graduate program in history, which I got and I received totally out of the blue, did not
Wow.
know about it.
Wow.
And I was able to go and get my master's degree in history again because this
Yeah.
person suggested me for this assistantship. So I was able to go and my tuition was paid for, and I worked for a couple of professors. I got a stipend, very small stipend every month. But again, that was enough to pay for my books
Hmm.
and, and the basic materials that I needed. So really two people that were very,
Wow.
very influential.
What made you, because you became very insightful in grabbing all these additional discipline, if you will, to enhance the discipline that you were focused on. You had the history, and then you were pulling from art, language, all of these. What made you,
Archaeology, that
yeah,
kind of thing.
what made you, um, uh, what made you begin to start diversifying your education, if you will, to pull these other um, information to you? What was it that you saw that you needed to do that?
Just within myself, I had this curiosity to see the whole picture.
Hmm.
And again, I think a lot of that is missing in education today.
Yeah.
We are teaching to the test. And at the end of my career, I became more and more disillusioned
Hmm.
with the way teachers were being manipulated. And the children, in my opinion, are really being cheated. Uh, Setting up these, arbitrary standards. Of course, there have to be standards, but children learn in a variety of different ways. And by
Yeah.
setting up the one way, it's kind of like the my way or the highway approach.
Yeah.
It doesn't account for the needs of so many students, whether they be children with language needs, ESL students, or students who have physical disabilities, reading disabilities, speech handicaps, all kinds of problems that interfere with learning. And the teachers are not given the leeway to address those individual styles. This is the curriculum. This is the way we do it. And I've worked with administrations that refuse to deviate in any way. You must
Wow.
do this. If you don't teach it this way, you're not getting tenure. And then, politics and money, everything creeps in because the schools get grant money,
Yeah.
and then they're told, well, you can have this grant money, but you have to do things this way, X, Y, and Z. And then technology, of course, has stepped in to change things. And again, money plays a big part in technology. I
Yeah.
worked with a large school system that developed a multi-million dollar new technology system that everyone was going to be using. It lasted 6 months and they trashed it.
Wow.
Millions of dollars just, thrown out the window. And then the data. Now everything is the data, the data, the data.
Yeah.
Teachers spend more time collecting data than they do teaching. And I'm talking about not just the special education. When I was working with special education children, of course there were there were all kinds of additional paperwork because
Yeah.
each child had an individual education plan which
Yeah.
you had to develop, follow. But I'm talking about every teacher. They are just railroaded. Well, keep track of this, keep track of this, keep track of that, keep track of this. And they actually have to spend classroom time copying down the data, documenting everything that they're doing. And then maybe 5 or 6 weeks teaching to the test, the major tests that are given in each grade, whether they be reading, math. Some grades have additional tests like science and social studies. So you spend about 6 weeks preparing children for that test. And what has happened? The statistics don't lie. In the last 20 years, the United States has experienced a significant decline
Yeah.
in their standards. We're not going up, we're going the wrong way. We're going down. So
Can I
these
ask you a
programs are
question,
not working.
Barbara?
Yes.
Do you believe that the one system, if you will, can it be one of the reasons by which we are seeing the delinquency? Because again, we are not, because of this one system, we are not broad enough to try to address those other kids that do not function within that one system.
Oh,
And
I'm
then they
sure
get
that's a big
frustrated
part.
and
Yes,
walk
it's a
away and
big
all that
part. They
stuff.
get frustrated and they have no other opportunity available to them. This is your school. I personally, I believe that the money should follow the child's need in education. It shouldn't just be, well, public schools get the majority of the money. Parents should have a say. They should have a choice. Whether it be a charter school, and COVID brought this to light when
Mm-hmm.
many parents saw what their children were learning and how they were being taught. It was a huge wake-up call. They did not like what they saw,
Yeah,
and children didn't learn well via distance learning. That didn't meet the needs of a lot of children, whether they be children who were significantly below standard or significantly above. It didn't always work for the gifted children either.
yeah,
So, when you try to, again, filter everything into this one way, this is the way we're going to do it, it doesn't work. And parents started to think about other ways of educating their children. By necessity, they had to find
yeah,
other
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
So, whether it be a charter school, which my own children had some experience with charter schools, and it works for many children
mm-hmm.
to help a child develop a passion. A charter school can be a way for children to pursue an interest like music or art,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well as their academic education. Whether it be homeschool, for some children, homeschooling is the answer. Whether it be a kind of mini cooperative schooling situation where a few parents get together and create their own homeschooling initiative within a wider network. So not the parent teaching own children, but
yeah.
uh, different parents either hiring teachers or getting together and doing it themselves. So there are many, many different ways that we could present education, and vocational education is very, very much ignored in our country. So many children have a passion that involves a hands-on type of
Yeah.
skill, and we should be encouraging that, not discouraging it,
Do you
because
think? Do you think with because you mentioned it, I believe that COVID came to identify certain, give us the opportunity to slow down and to see what's really happening. And I think a lot of people started to reevaluate their life, and we got a chance to look at this different systems that we were a part of, and we began to notice some of the shortcomings within those systems. As you had mentioned, where the parents are beginning to see what was happening in the education system. Do you have any, because I'm sure you still have some tentacles within that system, as they are talking and all that stuff. Do you hear any whisper of them trying to change the model, if you will, because they're looking at the data? You're saying the data is showing that there's a decline. Do you see or hear any type of whisper where they're thinking of, we need to rethink the way by which we are, teaching our children, and include some of the things that you're trying to teach and bring to the table, such as critical thinking skills and so forth? Do you hear any type of whispers concerning
Well,
any
I
change?
think it's more than a whisper. There are so many parent organizations that have formed. I know I worked with one of them, No Left Turn in Education,
Mm-hmm.
and they provide all kinds of resources to parents. I have some of my resources on their website as an alternative,
Yeah.
means to education. uh, Things that do develop critical thinking and a more interactive and multidisciplinary way of learning. There are parents defending education, heroes of liberty. A lot of educations, parents are becoming active in their local school boards
Mm-hmm.
and becoming much more aware that looking to see that their personal family and religious uh, interests are represented in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So teachers, a lot of them are walking away from the
Oh,
public
yeah.
schools, and
Yeah.
many of them have quit and taken a reduction in their salaries simply because they cannot go along
Yeah.
with what is going on in the public school system. So there is, I think, a very active movement both in terms of the people who are involved in public education and the people outside of it who are now aware that so many children are being deprived of the opportunities that they deserve, whether
Yeah.
that be parents or grandparents. Grandparents are very active in this as well. And I think we are on a path to eventually develop a lot more alternatives. And we're already seeing that in the numbers of the declining numbers in public school enrollment. The public
Mm-hmm.
school enrollment has gone down
Wow.
um, in all different types of communities, whether that be a rural community or whether that be the community in large cities. And parents are, now aware of, well, we don't have to settle for this. If this
Yeah.
isn't working, we have to get off our butts, we have to get involved, and we have to make it happen because this is our children's future at stake, our
Yeah.
children and our grandchildren.
After you retired, Barbara, and your personality kicks in, and you realize, I can't do this. And you acquired all of the information. And what prompted you to step out? You mentioned a little of it, but I wanted to dig a little deeper as to after you realize that you can't stay home and drink coffee and chill, as they say, rock in your chair. What prompted you? What was that discussion, that conversation that steered you to where you are today to start the process to begin to do what you do?
Well, I think a big impetus was my husband designing the cartoon character because I knew what I wanted to do and I knew how, of course, to get the information. And of course, I've had tons of experience writing papers, academic
Mm-hmm.
papers.
Yeah.
I was a history major and English minor, so writing, was always in the cards. So
Yeah.
I have been writing all of my life, just not specifically writing for a children's audience. But when you think about it, children's books are written not just for children, they're written for the adults who are
Adults
going
that
to be
read the book.
reading the books to the
Yeah.
children and who are going to be buying the books
Yeah.
for the children. So my books really do appeal to the adult because, again, the adults love learning these things that I never knew that. Gee, that's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
new that I never knew. And the teachers as well. Remarkably, a lot of the teachers weren't aware of many of these things. But so my husband kind of pushed me into getting really involved with the children's books because without that character,
Yeah.
I really didn't know how I was going to make this something that was going to become alive for the children. So that was, I think, the biggest thing that pushed me into the books. And then when I got into the books, I wanted to stay more in tune with the kids themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I now don't live in the city. I live in a more rural area of upstate New York, and I don't have as easy an opportunity to get into classrooms. I do some classroom visits, but I do other types of events like I've done events at museums. I do events at historical sites, like I'm doing one this upcoming weekend at FDR's home and Presidential Library. I did write a book about that, and they have a holiday event for children, and I go there and I read to them and interact with them, and it's lots of fun. But COVID brought about the situation where, especially living in New York, we were locked down for a very, very long time. And everything was canceled. So I went virtual. And that brought me to this whole new depth of getting into parents and teachers' lives with my message. So I started doing these little short videos, and I started thinking about all the things that were lacking in education, like the critical thinking. So, I do videos about little tiny lessons that parents or teachers can use to help develop. So what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is focusing on a problem and then not just seeing the problem, but analyzing it, making the connections between the people and the things, looking at how people were connected with each other. How did they communicate? That certainly has changed throughout history. So we went from having just letters and diaries, basic sources of history, but take a lot of time to develop and consume. Think about how long it used to take to get a letter to somebody. Then we had the telegraph. Then we had the telephone. Now we have the internet. The internet, I think, is both a curse and a blessing, because now today children just go on the internet and, I'll Google it. I'll go on the internet. The first answer that they see is the answer for them. How many people go beyond page 1 when they do a search on the internet? I will go on to like page 10 sometimes to get all of the, but children and most adults are not going to do that. So we need to bring people back to the questioning. And again, big part of history, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. Our lives have changed dramatically 21st century. So how has that impacted the way we learn? Well, children want instant answers. They want to be able to go on, find the answer, and they want to be accepted by their friends. So what happens? They use social media. Social media uses algorithms. They don't see all of the opinions. They will see what the social media site wants to show them. Now they want to fit in with their friends. So social media will present what their friends are thinking and asking and doing. They want to fit in, so they will do what their friends are doing. This is a real danger because we don't have open discussion anymore. We're being funneled into these very, very segmented groups that are often in so much opposition to each other, whether it's from a religious viewpoint or a political viewpoint or just an ego viewpoint where, well, I looked this up and I got the answer and I'm right. So you can't be right. Your opinion on that can't be right. So I want to show children these tools, and in my books, I try to expose them to that. Give them questions, give them ideas, give them different off ramps. So in my books, they can go off and they can learn more about the science or the environment. They can learn more about the animals. They can learn more about those forgotten people. Go off and research them. Who really were they? What did they do? And why were they left out of history? So there are so many different avenues that they can pursue. That's the way I learned, because I said I was always curious. I was always determined to get to the bottom of things. So I would go off on those little off ramps, and that's what I want children, to do. I want them to have open minds. I want them to listen. I think that's one of the most important things parents can do. To me, a really good parent is a parent who listens more than he or she talks. If you don't get to know your child, You
Yes.
cannot help to develop your child.
I had 4 boys, and I had to learn how to listen. Trust me, it was something else. It was an experience. I think personally, Barbara, that technology has made us. I hate to say the terminology, but I think it's made us a little foolish, and I believe it has taken away part of that critical thinking skills because we relied on the mind more so than we do today. Today, we just put in a couple of numbers, and like you said, we do a search, and the answer is there. But I believe we were, my brother and I, who's a professor, and we were talking about this a few days ago, and a couple of years ago, before all the smartphones, you and I had hundreds of phone numbers in our mind, in our head, that we could
That's
have
right.
spit out at any minute. You
I
asked
still
me.
remember my first phone number.
Today, like I said, I barely know my number because I rely so much on this technology to do it for me that my mind is not being utilized. The power of the mind is not being utilized. And as you said, a social platform, all these social platforms, I believe that even contribute to what I call the kids have become addicts. And you can see from the regular, when you look at a drug addict, the behavior of a drug addict when they can't have that particular drug is the same behavior that people are doing today when they can't have their phone and these electronic devices.
Exactly. Lose a
And
phone.
so,
It's a major
yeah,
catastrophe.
it's
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 social. It's really social addiction.
yeah,
That's
it's
that's
an
that's what
addiction,
it
and you could
is.
see it, and there's study to prove that as well, and all of the other things that they're finding as a result, suicide rate, everything. It's an attack on
Mm-hmm.
the mind of the young teenagers and even the adults. Those of you that are listening to this conversation with Barbara and I, especially your parents and the teachers, and even some of the kids that are listening to this podcast, I want you guys to go and purchase her books, get into her space, because it's really important to understand what she's trying to do with all of the exposure that she's bringing through Little Miss History and all of the adventures that she is on. And she's bringing you along so that you can learn and become. I always tell people our goal is to become better human spirits. You gain knowledge that will surprise you and out of history that has been suppressed because we've been moved one way and not the whole way, like what Barbara is trying to do. Parents, teachers, get in touch with her, get into her space, and acquire these things so that you can begin to open your children, open yourself, because the book is to you so that you can learn as well and bring back some adventure into this place called school, because learning needs to be adventurous. Barbara talked about the fact that she wanted to travel. So now she's getting to travel through her Little Miss History, and she's getting to do all the traveling, and Barbara is going to some of the places as well. She's been to one area that she hasn't been there yet. She mentioned
Well, maybe someday.
she's working on it. So again, guys, I want you to truly get into her, because what she is doing is so critical, especially with COVID came on and we saw where they were lacking. And she has some supplies that will be able to help you guys, to guide you and assist you in taking those children to the next level. Barbara, I want to thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment and sharing about your powerful, for lack of a better word, your new ministry, your new assignment that you have gotten so that you can step out and become a minister in the sense of opening up the world to the children and to their parents and their teachers. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I appreciate your support in my mission as well.
Thank you.